Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to introduce producer and award-winning screenwriter of The Cuban, Alessandra Piccione. So welcome, Alessandra.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on all your achievements. Can you share with us how your career started?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I call myself a recovering academic because
I
and I
love it.
say that, yeah, I say that because I was really on I've always wanted to be like, even when I was a little girl, I was always a writer at heart. I remember announcing to my grade 3 teacher that I was going to be a writer one day. And she said, well, when you write your first novel, you better dedicate it to me because I was the first person to, that you told that to, and that I really believed in you. So I always had that in my heart, and I always did write, and I, wrote short stories, poetry, little plays with my sisters, and I would force them to act them out, that kind of thing. But I really started on an academic track because I was an English major. I excelled in it. I went and did my master's, and my intention was to do a PhD and become a professor. But I took a year off, and that's when everything sort of changed. I got involved in a theater production where they required a translation of a play from Italian to English. And in the process of doing that translation, I started to make the play my own and started to really connect with the material. And when I saw the actors say the words, I think the rest is history. Honestly, it was just a magical experience for me. So it really started like that. And then I met my partner, who's currently still my partner, Sergio Navarrete, who's a director. I met him shortly after that experience, and he asked me to get involved with the short film that he was doing. And really the rest is history because we've been working together ever since.
Wow, that's amazing. So screenwriting is highly specialized. Can you talk us through your process as a screenwriter, and how do you decide on the story of the screenplay? And is this based off real life, or are these purely just unique ideas and stories that you have?
I have done a true story. That was actually my first feature film, was a true story called Looking for Angelina.
Yes.
It was a story of an immigrant woman who killed her abusive husband on Easter Sunday, 1911.
Wow.
And she was sentenced to hang. And it was really a remarkable story because it was like the O.J. Simpson trial of 1911. It was world famous. But because it was an embarrassment to the Canadian government, it got sort of swept under the carpet. It didn't make it into the history books. Now it's back into the history books thanks to our film, actually, and a few and other things as well. There were academics who were involved in bringing that story back. So that was my initial experience with making a feature, even though I had written other screenplays before. But I found that I'm really interested in true stories, in true historical stories, stories of people's lives and how they can be meaningful to us even today.
Yeah.
So I do take a lot of inspiration from true stories. I'm working on a true story right now as well. But most of what I've done does not come from the history books or newspaper articles. It's, The Cuban, for example, our last film was not a true story, but it was certainly inspired by tidbits of people's true experiences.
Yes.
For instance, one of the producers that worked on it with me and my partner, he had a dream. He dreamt about his grandfather, and then one of the other producers had a grandmother with Alzheimer's. I have experience. So everybody kind of brought some of their own experience to the initial seed of the story. And then it's just that sometimes things touch you a certain way, and I become compelled to, at least for me, when something touches me emotionally like that, I start to become compelled to tell the story.
Yes.
And it feels like the story is revealing itself through me. It doesn't feel like, at least when it's working, that's what it feels like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also it's powerful because it's like you say, even if everybody's bringing in different elements of their own experience, it obviously makes it more powerful and also highlights a specific subject or topic at that particular time.
Yeah, I mean, the inspirations come from different places, but ultimately, in the process of writing it, um, I have to make it my own, right? So I may draw on other things around me, but it's ultimately what that means to me and how I interpret it. And sometimes the meaning is even deeper than I realize, because I might realize months and months later that, oh my God, I was working through something there and I didn't even know I was. I can say that that's definitely true for The Cuban, for example, my last film. And I think it's true for my first film, Looking for Angelina, because I was working through things that happened to my grandparents who were immigrants around the same time that the story took place, and had not that exact experience, but very similar kinds of experiences. I also find that all my work, everything I've done, and this was completely a revelation that I had fairly recently, but everything I've done is somehow an immigrant story.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. True. Amazing.
Yeah. And that, I come from a family of immigrants, like so many of us do. And I think that's a theme that is always going to run through me, that idea of struggling with who you are and how you fit in, and, being displaced. I think I feel that personally, but also maybe even through the DNA somehow, very,
Yes.
very profoundly. Yeah.
So what would you say have been some of your biggest lessons and learnings within your career? I mean, there's probably a multitude of them, but what really stands out for you?
Well, there are many. That's true. There are many.
Mm.
But I think some of the most important ones are, related to what I just said. I mean, basically, that following a creative journey is an exploration. It's a self-realization journey. So I didn't realize that at first, but I think the more that I realize that, the more purposeful I can be in the process of creating. So, and I think it also informs the writing a lot more. If I'm more conscientious of it, or more, it helps me focus that realization. So I think that's probably the single most important thing that I've realized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in such a highly competitive industry, when did your big break happen, or was it a series of events that took place through your writing journey? And can you tell us more about this?
Well, I mean, yeah, being Canadian, it's kind of, because we're working within that system, at this time anyway, it's not your typical, like, oh, you have this big break and suddenly, you're on the, everybody knows you and you're on the big stage. It feels more like it's gradual and incremental.
Yes.
Because I'm also a producer. I've produced all of my films that have been produced. I've been involved in the producing.
Yes.
I've also, sold screenplays, but they haven't actually been produced yet. So, I mean, my successes, I've had a hand in every step of the way, basically.
Yes. Which is much better, because it gives you a broader perspective, right?
It does. And it also, I mean, there's a lot of humility involved in this industry too. I think that was going to be, if I went on with that last question, I would have said that humility is probably the second learning. I mean, there's no, you can't really let your ego get in the way of anything that you do, because the industry will
will eat you up.
Right?
Yeah, it's a very unforgiving industry. I think you have to watch what you do and say and all those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that a lot of people in the industry lean on their ego quite a bit, because there's a lot of fear involved, and I get that. Yeah. But at the same time, I mean, I don't know. I think there's a pretty heavy price to pay when you're just relying on your ego. You've got to have a deeper, more solid footing than that, because the wind can blow you so easily in whichever direction. And anyway, so that's a whole other thing. What was the question I was answering? Oh, I know. It was about about
your break in the industry.
The big break. Yeah, I mean, I would say it's been incremental for sure, building a career so that one thing sort of naturally leads to the other and you're making the next natural step. And also, it was a really big break to have Lou Gossett Jr. be in our last film. I think that was a fantastic accomplishment because it opened so many doors.
Yes.
And it also opened doors to invite other wonderful actors to, I mean, it's not that I don't think that they would have been involved otherwise, but I think that it only helped the project to know that he was a big supporter behind it, and that elevated everything. It elevated everybody else's excitement as well, just coming into it. Because, we didn't have a huge budget to make it, right? So it was, it was all about the love for the project and wanting to be involved with it. Yeah, I mean, and then the further you move along, the more the funders trust you, and want to be involved in your project. So it's been gradual.
Yeah, so it also adds credibility, like you say, as you go through the process.
Mm-hmm.
So when writing for film or series and producing, are you involved in the process of casting, or do you have the actors already in mind when writing? And what is the feeling seeing your story come to life from paper to the screen? And can you share more about this process?
Sure. Okay, so the first one was about casting.
Yeah.
Right. I do often think about who I'm writing for when I'm writing. So we always had Lou Gossett Jr. in mind. He had not yet committed, but in my mind, that's who was playing the Cuban on my last film. I also knew that the lead actress would be the lead in the film because she was also one of the people who was involved in the producing team, right? So I also knew, we had quite a few people already cast in mind. They were in mind as I was writing, for sure. I mean, actually, probably all the main characters. Yeah. Sure. And we approached them afterwards and got them, which is amazing because I don't know what I would have done.
Yeah, you would have had to adapt it to somebody else, I suppose.
That's right. It would have been totally different.
Yeah.
But my involvement in casting otherwise is pretty minimal. Like because Sergio, he's the director, right? So he really likes, and we're in a situation where this is possible, where he can have final say on his casting choices. And he has really great instincts. So I don't want to get in the way of any of that. It's just once in a while, he'll think of someone and get really excited about them. And I'll just kind of go, I don't know if that's a good idea. But, and I'm not always right. There was one time that I was right about that. And I had to just I said, no, you want this person for the totally wrong reasons. Please don't cast that person. But otherwise, his instincts are super dead on, and I don't get involved at all.
And then what is it like seeing your story come to life from paper to the screen? Because I'm sure that must be very rewarding.
It is. In fact, that's my favorite part, is seeing, being on set and watching the actors say the words, seeing it cut together and seeing it. Just, I don't know what it is. There's something about that transition from the page to seeing them perform the words.
Yes.
That to me is it's magic. I love that.
Amazing.
I think that's probably the main reason I do this, just to see that moment.
Yes. And also to see your vision come to life, so to speak.
Right.
So so what would you say some of your biggest career highlights have been? What stands out for you the most?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's right in line with that idea. It was, I think, the biggest career highlight for me. There've been a few, but the biggest one so far was definitely walking on set of the Cuban and seeing Lou Gossett Jr. there, because even though we had known we wanted him and we had known that he was committed for a while prior to me seeing him on set, obviously we negotiated his contract, like everything, just, you know, it had been a long time planning. But I arrive onto the set and I see him there, and it just took my breath away. I thought, oh my God, I'm in the presence of one of the greats.
Wow.
And that was an incredible experience. That was a big highlight for me.
Amazing.
Yeah. And another highlight was there are a couple of times when this happened, and it's a really special thing when it happens, because when you make a movie, you really don't know how the audience will receive it.
No, true.
Yeah, and you can try to plan that. I mean, the industry has ways of trying to preempt that and predict all of that, but ultimately you really just don't know.
No.
So, and I've experienced it on both sides. I've experienced it when it didn't quite have that effect, but my last movie, The Cuban, when we opened at the Pan-African Film Festival in Los Angeles, which is the largest Black film festival in North America. And, you know, it's very widely known and great festival. And when we got there and we started just putting up, you know, we got the posters up, we did a little bit of press. The press was very friendly to us and loved to cover the story. And there was just something happening. It just felt like there was a titter around, like people were starting to talk about this, and they were starting to, they showed up to the first screening and it was packed. So we thought that was pretty amazing, because we had just arrived and hadn't really done a ton of press to let people know. And the audience reaction was incredible. Like, people were talking to the screen, they were clapping in the middle of the film, they were so excited. And at the end of it, you know, they were just, you know, it was just, the excitement was incredible. By the second screening, there were people lined up around the theater. And we just thought, oh my God, are they here for us? Are they here for the movie? And they added a couple more screenings. Then Lou Gossett Jr. came, and it just kept growing and growing. It became a phenomenon. It just was this incredible experience. And then, of course, we won the, out of 225 films, we won the award for the best narrative feature. So that was a big highlight, because it felt like there was a groundswell of appreciation for the film. And we had something similar happen with our first film, Looking for Angelina, as well, when we screened it, when we first started screening it in Sault Ste. Marie, where we shot it. Yeah. The reaction was just incredible. So it actually ran there for 2 months straight, just in the theaters, with packed theaters every single day. So
that's amazing. Wow.
That was a real highlight as well. Yeah, I'd say those were the two big ones.
So in saying that, obviously you wear many hats. What was the process like for you expanding into the producing of films? And was this an organic process for you, or did it have its own set of challenges? Because going from a writer to, you know, producing to many other aspects of the industry, was it a challenge, or was it just an organic process?
I think I always have had a hand in the producing, even though the writing was my first love, and that's what I always, but I've always sort of been involved, because in independent film, it's very easy to wear more than one hat. In fact, It's difficult to take one off.
Yes.
It's very difficult. So I've always been involved in that. And I guess the producing satisfies one side of my brain. It can be very creative and challenging and interesting, and fun as well. I mean, you know.
If it's not fun, then you shouldn't be doing it, right?
Yes. I just do too much of it. I do too many of the producing jobs. So.
Yes.
Yeah.
But do you think that being an academic, or, you know, having that side of it has also helped you, or was it beneficial? Do you feel it helped contribute to what you're doing now?
That's a very good question. I think it has, because I was an English major, so it has certainly helped me internalize story for many years. I mean, that's what I was doing. Although, truthfully, the process of learning the academic world, in the academic world, my study was a study of, how to be a critic, not how to be a creative.
Yes.
So I think I would have made a great critic. I think I could still make a great critic if I wanted to choose to do that.
Yes.
But it requires such a leap from where I am now in terms of, like, you literally have to switch something off and turn something else on.
Yes.
Like, you have to, it's like the other side has to be activated instead of, and I can certainly go back to that, but I wouldn't want to. It's a different way of looking at the world. It's a very analytical way of looking at the world. And it's kind of the opposite of creativity, although there is some great criticism out there. And I'm sure that, there's a creative component to it, but mostly it's not that creative. Mostly it's taking things apart and pulling them apart and looking at them and examining them. And
it's also highly analytical, right?
Yeah, very analytical. And I don't know, I don't see a lot of happiness in that.
No. I'm sure you feel the same. I mean, I'm not an academic to your level, but, I think that we also so self-analytical ourselves. So that just makes it harder.
Yes. So that's a really good point, because I feel that training really played into my own natural ability to be self-critical.
Yes.
So I have an incredible ability to be self-critical. It's like, I'm really good at that.
Do you ever get to the point where it actually drives you crazy? Because I'm very analytical, and there's times where I actually drive myself crazy.
Yeah, and I think as women, we are also very hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
If you're brought up as a woman, you're trained to sort of be as perfect as you can. And then if you have perfectionist tendencies on top of that, it makes it that much worse.
Yeah, it compounds it.
Right, it compounds. So that, and I happen to be that way. So I certainly, excelled in the academic world, but I don't think it's not great for your growth and your creative, and it completely, I have to say, it completely shut down any creativity, like any creative bone in my body. Like, I really had to go back and relearn that. And I mean, as if I was a child again. So
Yes.
that's been a process too.
So I want to talk about creating and sustaining a long-term career as a screenwriter. And what do you believe makes your style of writing and your leadership style as a writer so unique? And how have you managed to sustain such a successful and long career in such a highly competitive industry? And can you give us any examples?
Sure. Okay. So what was the first part of that question again, just so I get it right?
So just creating and sustaining a long career as a screenwriter. And what do you believe makes your style of writing different?
Right. That was it. Yeah. So my style of writing is different because I am who I am. I don't believe that anybody everybody just writes from their own person and who they are. So by its very nature, your style of writing is always unique. There's an idea that we want to copy or do something that somebody else has done, or create something, that fits a certain way of doing things. But ultimately, and there's also an idea that a notion that there's, you're going to come out with something super original, for example.
Yes.
But the truth is, and I just heard Paul Schrader, who wrote Taxi Driver, he said this beautifully. He said, there are no original ideas in Hollywood. He said that Hollywood's ideas are really it's just a buffet of ideas. And then you go in and make your plate, right? Yeah. So you're just kind of cobbling together, but you're doing it from your own unique perspective, right? So that by its very nature makes it original and unique. Yeah. So I would say that's about it when it comes to my voice. And regarding, what was the other part again? Sorry.
Managing to sustain a successful and long career in the industry.
Well, I think that kind of goes back to wearing more than one hat, because from the beginning, I didn't wait for anybody to hire me or to pay me to do anything. I just started finding ways to raise funds and to create my own projects with my partner. We have a company called Snap Films,
Yeah.
and so that's how we do it, by not, and I don't know if that's the way it's always going to be done for me, but that is certainly the best way. And if I had, advice to give anybody else, I think that's a great way to, start your career, is just do it, and get as educated as you can in different parts of the industry, so that you can, you can learn. It's fun. You learn and you grow, and you can learn all kinds of different things about the marketing and the business itself.
Yeah.
And then you have a sense of control as well over what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk about your latest film, which is in the runnings for an Oscar nomination,
Mm-hmm.
The Cuban. So can you share with us more about the film, for those who don't know what the film is about, and why is the story so deeply personal for you? And what would you like the audience to take away from the film in terms of the story and the message?
Sure. So the story is about a young pre-med student who is Afghan in origin. Actually, she's an immigrant. It goes back to the immigrant stories. She gets her first job in a nursing home, and she meets an elderly man who has dementia, and is played by Lou Gossett Jr. And he's sort of trapped inside himself, and she realizes that he likes jazz music. So she begins to play music for him, and he starts to come out of his shell and learns more about him. They develop a friendship, and she finds out that he is a once famous Cuban musician, and his life has sort of gone off the rails. But she learns, more about her own life and who she really is through this experience. So it's about this friendship, and how memory, it sort of explores the nature of memory, the nature of the imagination. It's a celebration of the imagination. We go back in flashbacks in time to his time in Cuba, when he was, when he was playing the clubs there back in the 50s. So I couldn't have predicted, for example, that this film would come out at a time when people are very concerned about their elderly in nursing homes.
Yeah.
When there's a global pandemic, and everybody to some degree is dealing with, ideas of the nature of loneliness and isolation.
Mental health.
And mental health. Exactly. And that is a part of Luis's journey in the film as well. That he, part of the reason that he's so shut off from the world is not just the dementia part, but it's also, depression, right?
Yes.
Because those two things often go together hand in hand. That sense of isolation really aggravates mental health as well. So, yeah. So the takeaway, there's a dedication at the end of the film. It's dedicated to all those whose stories remain untold. And that is definitely what I think is the ultimate. And there are lots of themes in the film. There are lots of, different threads and things that are being explored. But ultimately, I felt, and we all felt on the team, that it's ultimately a dedication to those whose stories remain untold. So many of us, are in nursing homes or pass away without our stories ever really being passed on to the next generation.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point, because I feel this is something that I was speaking to a number of people about. I think, I'm not saying rich and famous people don't have problems, but I kind of feel like, especially with what we've seen gone on with the royal family, which I don't want to really get into, but just in terms of these types of things, I kind of feel like, why are, normal people, in the sense that aren't, in the public eye, why aren't their stories being told? Whether it's, like you say, mental health, anything related to those things, because I often feel like celebrities are highlighted, or people are paid millions of dollars to get these interviews out. And it's kind of like the stories that you're telling, I feel are way more significant. I'm not disputing what they're saying, but I just feel like these types of stories that you're telling need to be told far more than just listening to celebrities whine. So,
Right.
yeah.
I listened to, it's funny that I heard a little bit of that interview this morning before jumping on here with you. And it did occur to me, it's funny that you're bringing that up. It did occur to me that, I mean, it's a bit difficult for a lot of people in the world to have sympathy for that.
I don't, I must be honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, straight up honest, I just don't. And I think when people kind of exploit and get paid millions of dollars to do an interview, it's like, well, are you really addressing mental health, or are you just exploiting this as a media opportunity? Fine line.
Well, there is that, right? You know, it could be both. It could be both. And mental health is a serious thing. I don't want to discount it, but I do appreciate that it's challenging for people with regular lives who are going about their days, who are dealing with really hard things, especially now, really hard things. And to watch a prince and a duchess sit there and whine about, you know, I mean, I'm sure what they're going through is real. I don't believe that people with money don't have problems, or people who have a stature or, you know, anything like that. I'm sure their problems are just as real as anyone's. But at the same time, I think that people they struggle with that. So I think that's probably a big reason there's been some backlash, right?
But also the thing is, you know, if you have the money and the resources to access the kind of help that you can, and I mean, you know, I know there's a lot of complications within that environment or situation, but it's very different for people who don't have access, who don't have the funding, you know, who can't just get help at whim, you know. So I think, there's a lot of contradictory factors, in my opinion, on this particular situation.
Yeah.
So you've worked with Oscar-nominated talent. Can you share with us what that is like, and how do you begin the process of choosing the talent you want in the films? And is this in the hands of the directors and the producers, or do you also have a say in it? And what is that process? Because obviously you're having to deal with agents or negotiate contracts and all those types of things. So what is that process like?
So the screenwriter doesn't normally have any say, but because I'm also a producer, I do get involved in the casting process. But again, not that involved, because Sergio, when he directs, which usually he's the director, I leave that more up to him. As much as possible. It's pretty much all in his court, because as the director of a feature film, if we were doing television, I think it would be different. The rules of the game are different there, but for feature films, it's definitely the director's role, and so he handles that. I do get involved in more of the business side of it, and we do have conversations for sure about who would be great to cast for things. I mean, we do talk through all this stuff creatively, and I don't really ever disagree with him. So that's
that's always good that you have a mutual understanding and communication. So
it would be challenging if we didn't, I think.
For sure. So being an award-winning screenwriter is one of the highest achievements in the entertainment and film industry. So what was that like for you, and did this open other career opportunities for you?
Well, yeah, it does. It's definitely opening doors in terms of the amount of funding that we can get for our projects. So, and again, it's just the next rung on the ladder. It's the next stepping stone. There are a number of things that can be game changers in the industry, but they're not a lot, like major game. Everything is a stepping stone for sure. Yeah. And every award, every achievement is always a stepping stone. But, you know, let's say an Oscar nomination, like those kinds of things are big game changers. So But
or even just being in the running for a nomination must be a huge deal.
it is a huge deal. It is. So, it's all one step at a time. One
Yes.
step at a time. I'm developing my next projects now, and we'll see where that goes. There are definitely more doors open now. So, yeah.
For sure. So obviously we briefly touched on this pandemic, but COVID-19 has turned our world upside down and inside out.
Mhm.
So how has this affected you as a screenwriter? And although this has maybe closed some doors, it has also created other opportunities. So how do
Mhm.
you feel it has changed the film industry going forward, and how have you had to adapt?
Well, what's interesting about the film industry, and it's a creative industry ultimately, even though it's a business, but because of the creative spark that pretty much everybody has in the business I work in, people are always going to find a way around things.
Yes,
And the
of
film
course.
business really has. So production has been continuing throughout the pandemic, precisely because producers were able to find ways to meet, to meet and exceed all the expectations for COVID protocols and everything else. So because all that problem solving happened, it enabled the industry to continue.
Yes.
Maybe not at the same rate, but it's been going much better than most other industries.
Yes.
What it did affect very badly was our release, our theatrical release, which was supposed to be an in-person theatrical release. And that's still a problem because theaters all over the United States and Canada and in many places around the world are still closed. So pivoting on that in that respect is more of a challenge. So a lot of films got put on hold or have gone straight to online platforms, or
Netflix as well, I suppose, maybe.
Netflix, like whatever platforms are available, and iTunes mostly. And that's challenging because financially that's a big hit, right?
Yes, because you clearly don't make as much because there's not the ticket sales or people actually going to the theaters. So
right, and it's also missing out on a big promotional opportunity, because the theatrical release is always a big promotional opportunity. We were able to, with the Cuban, we were actually able to maximize the promotion as much as possible.
yes.
Thankfully, COVID helped us with that. COVID, meaning the pandemic situation that we're in. So it was kind of helpful with that, because all of a sudden everybody was doing everything on Zoom. So you could actually cover more press than you would have been able to previously.
Yes,
so that was a big bonus. We didn't have to fly anybody anywhere to do any big premieres. But of course, you miss out on that experience of doing those big premieres. But we did do a drive-in release in Canada, which was very successful. Drive-in releases, the releases in the drive-ins have a shorter life on the screen because of the nature of the drive-in, and it's just a different animal altogether. Yeah. But we were still able to do a number of drive-ins across Canada, and then a few in-person theaters. And we released in 52 markets in the US as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's really great. Again, it was just at the time of the pandemic, so all those theaters converted to virtual. So people were watching the film online. But it was still a great opportunity to get the press. And like I said, we were able to maximize it as much as we could. So there were definite pros and cons. And I think going forward, I'm sure that the industry will take some of the learnings from this experience of COVID. I hope it means that people will become more comfortable with Zoom meetings and things like that, instead of having to always meet in person, because it can be so much more efficient.
Yes.
Yeah.
But also, don't you find it during this pandemic, because obviously it's not great not to be able to have social interaction with people in the sense of physically being present. But I was actually having this conversation with somebody the other day and saying that I almost think that in some ways, this has actually helped people to be more focused and to be able to achieve more, because when you're flying and going all to different places all the time, there's so much time wasted in between that I don't know whether you found that it's actually helped you to get more done without all the external distractions.
Definitely. No, actually, yes. As a writer, I mean, part of me didn't really notice the pandemic, I'm going to be honest, because I'm just at home, you know, doing my thing anyway. And writing, and the rhythm of my day has definitely changed because my son is doing virtual learning from home. And of course, everything now is happening in the house, all the business activities as well as the creative. So there's a different rhythm. I have to be a lot more flexible. But I do sort of appreciate not having to, you know, I mean, if I had a meeting prior to this or a couple of meetings, that would be it. That would be my whole day between the travel time, the parking, the gotta grab lunch, gotta, you know. Now I can be much more sure of myself when I say, okay, I've dedicated my writing time today and nothing's going to cut into that except for maybe my son once in a while. And I know that I'll have that time. I know that I can do that. I can't just, you know, there are no more excuses where it's like, oh, I have a few meetings. Oh, well, no writing today. I can't do that anymore. So, yeah.
So your other screenplays and short films, Looking for Angelina, you co-wrote The Reunion, The Colossal Failure of the Modern Relationship, and so many more, earning nominations and awards, which is incredible. So could you please talk to the audience through when you take on or embark on your writing journey for a feature or small project, from the time the project is birthed to the completion on the screen, are you constantly writing or engaged in multiple writing projects, or do you focus on one writing project at a time?
So that's a good question. I am actually right now focusing on, can you see me, by the way? Because I think, oh, there we go. Okay. I touched something. I actually do have more than one thing going at the same time for the most part, unless I have a deadline or I have a very strict. So I will usually spend a certain amount of time on one thing, then finish. So I'll create like a benchmark for what I want to achieve with that, and then I'll put it aside for a while. Maybe bring it to my writing group or have somebody read it or get a little bit of feedback on it. I have a writing group that I work with that's really great, that I really trust. So that's good. And then I'll switch into the other thing for a while, or maybe I'll have 3 things going. And then I'll flip back to the other one. So that sort of is a way to keep me interested, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. Because sometimes I'll be working on something and then I just sort of feel like I'm running out of steam. And when I put it aside for a bit and then I look at it again, it's like, oh my God, it's like a whole new project. And then I get excited and all these new ideas come in, and, you know, and then I'll see things. It's like, oh my God, why didn't I see that before? It's so obvious now, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So have you ever had a writer's block? And if so, how do you overcome this? And also, how do you juggle between so many roles as a writer, producer, academic, and also being the founder and president of Snap Films Inc., and still also have a life? Because you've obviously got a family as well. So how do you balance all of that?
Okay, I'm going to answer those questions backwards if I can remember. How do I juggle all that? I juggle it. Not very well sometimes, to be honest. You know, part of me wants to say that it's great. I just have my schedule and I work it out, but it is challenging. And I think most women would appreciate me saying that. It's challenging because sometimes one part of what I do just starts to take over for a while, and then the other things sort of fall to the wayside. So I'm starting to get better at finding people to do things that are not necessarily the best idea for me to handle. or my partner. So that's been a big learning curve for us. And, but I think it's super important, and it's the best, it's the only way really to grow as a business. So that's how I'm handling that. I'm trying to answer them backwards, but then I forgot the middle question.
The question was, how do you overcome writer's block if you do get it? And also just juggling between the roles and still kind of have a life with your family.
Yeah, I mean, juggling between the roles is, well, I mean, everything I do has a creative component.
Yes.
Except when it comes to, business planning, maybe say the money side of things, and some of the more administrative work. But other than that, there's always a creative component to it, and it's all so I approach both things the same way. Whereas it comes from me, it comes from my partner on, when we come together and we're planning, building our business. And so it's all based on, our vision for our lives and for our careers. So it has a natural, one flows naturally into the other.
Yes. So what would you say the best place that, like when you write, do you have a special place that's like a sanctuary for you that you just go and write, or do you move around? Like
that's interesting, because before the pandemic, I was writing at Starbucks coffee shops all over the place. So wherever I go to Starbucks, I just sit myself down. And, I always used to say that, Starbucks, they say Starbucks coffee is expensive, but I figure that the cost of the coffee is also the cost of the office, right? So to me, it's not expensive.
No, exactly. It depends how you look at it at the end of the day, right?
Exactly. So I would really enjoy, just sitting at Starbucks and having my coffee, having my, whatever, and writing, watching the world go by. And then sometimes I would switch that up with working from home. But I wouldn't, it's never like, it's almost never at like in a desk, like I'm sitting at a desk right now in an office, sort of home office situation. It's not usually that kind of environment. It's usually I'm sitting on a couch. I've got a blanket on me. I'm at a table, at the kitchen table, for example, and nobody else is around. I like to switch it up.
Yes.
So
it's important as well, because otherwise, if you're in one place, I'm the same. Like I have to move around. That's why COVID is a bit difficult.
I don't know what that is. When I'm writing, I have to move around.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the ideas flow better if I move. Okay, now I've got to move into this other room. So since the pandemic started, I've been moving from room to room.
Yeah.
Every time I'm working on writing something. Yeah. Before the pandemic, it was going to different coffee shops. Now it's room to room. So, or sitting outside. When the weather's nice, I like to write outside.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So that leads me to the two final questions. So what are the three key pieces of advice you would give to others who are looking to pursue a career as a screenwriter and multiple roles? And what legacy would you like to leave, or how would you like to be remembered?
Well, I mean, the advice I would give to a screenwriter, I'm going to answer the question about writer's block with that one.
Yes.
Is the creative process comes from you, and it's always very important to enjoy your work, to enjoy what you're doing, to find the joy in it. If you're not enjoying it, like you said earlier, what's the point?
Yeah.
It's a hard business, so find the joy in it, because otherwise it will not be a pleasant experience at all.
No.
And in the process of finding the joy, it's really important not to be too self-critical. So I have this sort of theory that there's a committee in my mind of different characters, that kind of like the movie Inside Out, where there's the emotional one, there's the cranky one, there's the critic. The critic is probably also the cranky one, and then there's the nurturer. And and then others, but the nurturer is the one that I call on when I'm writing. So if I run into a problem in my writing and I can't think of how to get through it, I can't go on anymore. Or I just can't even think of what could happen next. I just sort of get this block. It actually just happened to me recently. It's really important to call on that nurturer, and the nurturer for me says, "Don't worry, you'll get through it. You'll find a way. You will find a way. Just take a break, and you do find a way." But if you're very critical of yourself and making it even harder than it is, that just makes it harder to find a way through and to be creative. So that's the advice I would give someone who's writing. The other piece of advice would be just write. Because that is yours, make that your sacred domain, and don't ever let anybody get in the way of that or tell you not to do that. And don't ever think it's a waste of time, because it's really important to write. And that ultimately is the thing that will get you from A to B. It's not so much all the connections in our business are very important and all of that. I think we all know that all of that is very important.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's the writing that gets you through the door. It's the writing that will dictate what happens next.
Yeah.
So that's my advice on that piece. And
thank you. And then, what legacy, or how would you like to be remembered?
I'd like to be remembered as someone who. It's funny. It's a funny question, because I don't think writers are usually remembered, at least not screenwriters. But,
or they're remembered after they die, which is never really great. All famous poets and.
I think it's important that my work touches people. So I would like to be remembered, or if I'm not remembered, then that I would like my work to be remembered as something that touched someone in an important way, and made them feel something, and made them maybe look at their lives a little differently. And that to me would be a great honor if I'm remembered that way.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Alessandra. I really appreciate you joining us today. And if people want to connect with you, what are the best platforms to do so?
Well, my handle on Instagram is Sasha Screenwriter. So that's probably the best way.
Okay.
I'm also on Twitter, but I'm not very active on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, thanks for joining, and then hopefully we can have you in the future to hear about your future projects.
Thank you so much, Ad. That'd be wonderful.